This real-side experience would begin in the company of an old school colleague, one I had not seen for many years. Recently, I have been having real-side experiences with this very individual featuring, and would put it down to it just being perhaps a maintained as yet unreleased attachment that allows him then to feature. But then, with all individuals in any particular simulator, that to be there must have them accept in a sense the overall consciousness construct as it presently stands, that affects the particular chosen simulator, its design, life levels, etc., like choosing a particular computer game that is shared by others also, that then each participant has the basic game or simulator template and then makes whatever choices and additional decisions that they do within this shared arena, as after all, ideas shared are the affected experiences shared, and this is so for an entire simulator, as it being one large overall set of multi-dimensional ideas that comprise its structure. And so, regardless of intent, that which can have us deviate from the direct simulation experiences of others, operating in creation as we are, we can potentially encounter any other individual within it, as they, as I said, share the same simulator overall template with ourselves, the same overall stage or arena. And on the real side, as things do move more so by imagination, as every thought is instantly its effects, it's very easy to find ourselves in the presence of those we may have not seen on the physical for years, by creating even the slightest consideration of them, consciously or subconsciously. But as this old school associate is one who is very much personal self, consciousness immersed, with no interest in anything much beyond the one-dimensional physical level, generally, if we encounter such a people, their actions reflect their limited life positioning, and yet this individual has rather been behaving in real-side experiences in ways that suggested he wasn't the actual individual, but one adopting his form, as though a being operating from a position of a greater awareness than the actual individual whose form he was utilizing. And I have mentioned before how the guides will assume on occasion the body form of another old school associate called Keith, and although this being in more recent experiences, including this one, who is utilizing the form of this other school associate, is not a guide, as real awareness impressions suggest, he is, however, seemingly a very aware being, just choosing to adopt this form. I would be accompanying him, and he was leading me through various street settings, the streets being of a design very much that of the UK, and what was most striking was what has been shared by others and myself regarding how the idea of the coronavirus has embedded itself as an agreement in the consciousness overwhelmingly of humanity, and is reflected on the real side multi-dimensionally, in that you will see humans on the real side adopting the same protective measures, the mask wearing, the maintaining of a distance, etc., as they do on the physical. For indeed, the consciousness is always in effect if one is locked into a total agreement with it, and expresses as its design throughout the various life levels and in the actions of the corresponding body vehicles, including all additional thoughts, emotions we entertain. The body forms will be carrying out that which we create idea-wise automatically. This part of the experience would be no different, as I followed this individual in the form of the old school associate through recreated physical level streets, and the fear among the humans there was very palpable, as they wore their masks and darted from our path in alarm at the risk of contracting the virus, etc. Another individual would enter the scene, the street setting fading and giving way to a more natural setting. She seemed familiar, though not to my current lifetime memory file of experience references, so perhaps some affiliation from another lifetime or dimension, that although my personal self didn't know her, my real awareness would, as it has access to everything creational, and this is where the impression of familiarity stemmed from. She seemed somewhat dismayed by my appearance, and proclaimed how we once had had a relationship, but I was of a different body type. She looked very human in appearance to me, but it was as though the real awareness sifted through the consciousness of its created self, and identified the lifetime dimension that I had once had association with this woman, and my form would even alter to that which she had once known, despite being very much human-like in appearance herself. My body form would become that of a walking, bipedal cat person, a body form I have encountered and shared the experiences of on the real side on a number of occasions, and it would seem that she had had a relationship then with what in fact was an individual from a different species, myself as I was, in whenever and wherever that may have been. She retained then emotional attachment to myself as I once was, and just a random insertion of another individual into the real side experience. However, she seemed to want to continue with a relationship that must have ended whenever it did, and although I had assumed this form almost to humour her, to re-establish attachment to what is in fact just an idea, the idea of the body form, the emotional aspect, etc., would be somewhat limiting, as she was one who was content to remain creationally bound, and to share her experience then, or to rekindle it, I would have to be equally as limited, as she had no intention of getting beyond the effects of her consciousness. And so I would return to my current form. She was somewhat dismayed. I attempted to convey to her the references of the ears, but she was not in the slightest bit interested, and faded from the scene, to remain the effects of whatever she was deciding, whatever the consciousness she was remaining in agreement with comprised of, idea-wise. And in the next scene, the natural setting became more so a richly decorated living room of a house, and within would be my deceased grandfather, the father of my father, and unlike, as I have also shared before, how the guides do adopt the form of my grandparents on occasion, this would not be the case here, as my impressions suggested, for in fact this was the genuine individual, and he had transitioned from the physical about 35 years ago, but it was as though he was about to assume another physical level incarnation, and however 35 years translated as, on the astral, where he undoubtedly would have gone, being another personal self-consciousness immersed, physical, astral-focused individual. Initially, he retained the physical form he had while still on the physical level, though much younger, and then his form would become that of who he would become when reaching adulthood in the lifetime on Earth he was about to begin. His form would be that of a woman in fact, and although he initially recognized me, and indeed embraced me, as his form became that of what he would become, it's as though he would recognize me no longer, almost like amnesia of everything that had occurred from his previous lifetime that incorporated myself, as every experience was moved to the subconscious, and he would be assuming a new female body form absent of any experience until he, or rather she, began to fill that memory body with new experiences. What happened next was curious, that even though what had been my grandfather recognized me no longer, she was motivated to offer me a great gift, as she put it, and would exit the house we were in. I was intrigued, so would follow her. Outside the house would be a large construct that stretched seemingly thousands of feet into the sky. My grandfather that would be scaling this very structure, with the promise of my great gift, and that I should follow. Interestingly, the situation was not just befalling me, as there were hundreds, if not thousands, of other individuals who, having been temporarily reacquainted with their transitioned family members, had had a similar offer from each of them of a gift. And as I watched, all these keen and eager to receive this gift individuals were scaling this formidable-looking structure, each of their respective departed family members had reached a point in the colossal structure beyond my ability to perceive from where I stood at the bottom. My grandfather, in his new female-to-be form, was a part way up it and still in sight, and so I would join this mass of individuals. The structure was like a spiralling helter-skelter, but the first 100 feet or so was of a very crude design, and indeed very difficult to climb, but not impossible, for indeed all the individuals doing so would be assisting each other. The structure would eventually be less arduous, as though it had been made more climbable from a certain point on upwards, and as I reached this level of it, and eventually reached the top, the scene switched, and I found myself having to quickly negotiate a kind of mechanical tunnel that was rapidly decreasing in size, and all across the surface of the tunnel were wickedly sharp blades that were one not swift enough to reach the tunnel's end. One would be somewhat diced, and so it was that I traversed the diminishing blade-laden tunnel just in time, and now I found myself in a very gloomy and forbidding cave-like setting, in the presence of a large dragon-like being, one that walked bipedal, and as I looked down at myself, I would realize I had transformed into a similar dragon body type, just not as large, that I was in chains, and my function now was to add fuel to enormous furnaces under the domination of this dragon being. My impressions of the situation were afforded to my personal self via my real awareness, and were this: that yes, the individual that was my grandfather was the genuine individual, that he was indeed to begin a new lifetime as a female, and yes, all the countless thousands of others had seemingly an audience with their equally as genuine, deceased, transitioned family members, and each, as my grandfather had done, had offered a gift. This gift, then, was seemingly a surface-only, beneficial idea, but behind the surface was an altogether different intent and agenda. Any intent will be as any idea in creation is, that which generates effects based on its nature, if we agree to it, and so, as we agree to the surface-presented ideas, oftentimes we are agreeing to more than we realize, including the intent as an idea behind it. In this case, it was as though the dragon being, affiliated with the dark forces in his own particular way, was using the transitioned family members in this fashion, almost like a honey-pot, that as they present the possibility of gifts, what in actuality was being agreed with was domination under this dragon creature, the intent behind the marketed front. But it was as though the family members offering the gift were sincere enough, as though they genuinely considered this gift to be beneficial, as though oblivious as to how they were being used, how they were in affiliation agreement, most likely subconscious, that which they were unaware of, with this ill-intended dark force dragon being, and how then our agreement with the family members was in fact agreement with this dragon's intent for control. For as the human consciousness is based on agreement to control, extended to the dark forces in all their forms and expressions, any individual deciding to be in agreement with the consciousness is effectively part of the control system, an extension of it, a little like in the Matrix movie, where at any given moment the agents can utilize an individual and operate through them, as they have rather given permission that the agents, the dark forces, can express their power over them in whatever ways the agreement parameters allow. The dark forces can operate through the one-dimensional, unconscious, unaware individual and tapline us, have us inadvertently agree to the dark forces through agreement with what seems to be on the surface a sincere individual, and an expression of the consciousness. Its overall inclination has given rise to a being known as the influence. As the overall consciousness rather is designed to want to remain in creation, so the influence operates in this manner, her objective to keep everyone creationally bound, and so will operate in such ways in relationship with others through those who are personal self-consciousness immersed only. And so it was here that through the design of the human consciousness, that of agreement to the dark force simulator controllers, and through the ever-present influence, so these transitioned family members represented nothing other than taplining agents, and through them, through agreement to the surface idea of the gifts they were offering, in actuality this translated to agreement to this dark force dragon creature, and culminated in the effect experience of not only being in his power, but becoming a body form, a dragon-like reptilian creature similar to his own, and positioned in creation in an area that I impressioned as somewhere lower astrally based, and being set to work, fueling these enormous furnaces. But with every agreement we make, we are not bound to the effects unless we maintain the agreement, whatever it might be. And so, having recognized this situation, as the large dragon creature was proclaiming how I must fuel the furnaces of the lower astral for eternity, I simply retracted the agreement. The scene faded, my bipedal dragonic form now gone, my usual form re-established, and in my hands I held what was the agreement I had just released, as though a written contract, and there beside me would be the individual who had been with me at the start of this experience, the very aware being in the form of the other old school colleague, and at a nod from him, so the contract would burst into flames, and its cinders drift off into the wind.